City Club members, friends, guests, and community members, welcome to the City Club of Central Oregon. Today's program is How to Respectfully Agree to Disagree. My name is Blair Garland, Senior Director of Community Relations and Marketing at OSU-Cascades, and I'm honored this year to serve as your City Club Board President. This is the third year that City Club has partnered with the Bend Chamber's Bend Young Professionals. This group is designed for those aged 21 to 40 who are focused on both professional and personal development while becoming more engaged citizens. We appreciate the topics that they bring to City Club, and today's forum is an example of their dedication to those goals. Today's live stream is made possible by Connect Central Oregon, a nonprofit launched with the assistance of the OSU-Cascades Innovation Co-Lab. I'd like to take a moment to thank our City Club annual sponsors. Without their support, we would not be able to bring you today's program. Even in this challenging year, our sponsors have continued to step up and support City Club because they care deeply about our community. You can find a list of all of our annual sponsors on our website, and I encourage you to do that. But I'd especially like to thank our platinum sponsors, Brooks Resources, St. Charles Health System, and the City of Bend, our community partner education, OSU Cascades, and our gold sponsors, First Interstate Bank, ASI Wealth Management, and Pacific Source. We also depend on your membership support. Your investment in a City Club membership is an investment in civil, productive conversations about the topics that matter most in our community. And your membership is also a personal statement. It says that you believe discourse, civil discourse, is so important, perhaps now more than ever. If you've been thinking about becoming a member, now is a great time. And as a bonus, if you join or renew during December, you are automatically entered into a drawing to win a half day with Wanderlust Tours or a 1-month membership at the Haven Co-working Space. You can find more information at our website, cityclubco.org. City Club is deeply committed to civility, and it's the focus of today's live stream, How to Respectfully Agree to Disagree, perhaps especially important as we enter this holiday season. And with that, let me introduce Addie DeLong, Leadership Development Programs Coordinator for the Bend Chamber. Thank you, and please enjoy today's program.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I am Addie, as Blair said. Thank you so much to Blair and City Club for the great introduction. We love working with City Club YP professionals and programming. This year for our December session, we've decided to try to work on and learn more about how to have conversations instead of avoiding them. As our nation gets more and more divided, we're confronted with the opportunities to have difficult conversations daily, hourly, and we have to decide, do we jump into this? Do we not? Do we avoid it? Knowing how to step into these conversations, though, with confidence and trust in the relationship is a really hard thing to do. So it's really important to us as young professionals that we learn how to have these conversations because we know that the future of our country depends on it. Today, we will watch an actual hard discussion happen between two friends, two young professionals who disagree, Harrison Womack and Shannon Bennett. And we also have Dr. Stephen Koski here to help us along the way to put things into perspective and to learn some things that we can take with us into our real lives and try to have these conversations. So thank you again so much for being here. Harrison and Shannon, before we get started today, would like to share a little bit with you all about their prepping for this event today and what an encouragement it was to them.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Addie. So before we dive into our actual conversation, Shannon and I, we wanted to give you guys a little bit of context. We actually met each other through Bend YP. So Shannon had been on the advisory board for a long time. And then I joined the committee, and then I started taking over as the chairman of that board. And so that was kind of the initial stage when we met. I think that was in like 2016, 2017, somewhere in there. And then Shannon, why don't you kind of tell us from a little bit more of your perspective when we first started getting involved with that?
Sure. Great, Harrison. Yeah, so like Harrison mentioned, he kind of took over as a leadership role for our advisory committee that I've been on for a long time and enjoyed working on. And right away, I could tell that Harrison and I had very different beliefs and ideas about things. And so, quite honestly, I was a bit nervous about his leadership because we were so different. And over time, short amount of time, we became friends, and I realized that we got along just great and had no problems.
Yeah, and it was really, really cool to see just be able to work in an environment where you're around people of different perspectives, and you can start to, get to know them and respect where they come from. And so we wanted, when the opportunity came this year for us to kick off a conversation with Ben YP, I was working with Addie, and we were trying to find someone that would have a difficult conversation. And I picked up the phone and I called Shannon, and I was like, "Hey, Shannon, here's the deal. We want to have this conversation, but here's the one criteria: we have to find something that we disagree on." And Shannon just kind of quibbed right back. She was like, "Well, I'm pretty sure we could just pick a topic and we would disagree on it." So that's kind of how we found this conversation, that we would have it. And then after we decided that, we went and decided back in November we were going to have beer at Monkless and kick it off. But the first thing we wanted to say is, like, this is not a debate. And it's really important if you go into a debate, the goal of the debate is to win. And so if you're coming into a conversation trying to win, that's going to definitely sacrifice the relationship. I mean, just look at the, presidential debates of the last 6 months. Like, it was just a disaster, and not respecting. But that's not what this is. Like, we've enjoyed working together. We've built mutual respect and appreciation. And so this is a conversation that we're hoping to have. And then we just wanted to summarize kind of how encouraged we were when we met at Monkless. So Shannon, do you want to kick that off and kind of tell a little bit more about how we had that conversation and kind of, what it made us take away from?
Sure. Yeah. So I thought going into the conversation, it was going to be very simple because we did disagree on quite a few things, which I knew. But when we sat down and we both had such a mutual respect for each other, it was really enlightening and exciting to see that even though we found topics we could disagree on, it wasn't even something we could take to debate level because we were so just respectful of each other and of each other's views and wanted to hear the other side and opinions. So it was a really interesting thing to kind of discover and find out.
Yeah. And when we kicked it off, it was really fun to just ask, so what do you think about this topic? And what do you think about this topic? And really we came with a genuine curiosity, and that was really cool. And then we got to hear more about each other's stories and kind of what informs those decisions of, like, why someone would be in a certain camp on a certain topic. And so I feel like when we had that conversation, we both walked away, at least I did. I walked away just really actually encouraged that I could meet with someone, because it was right after the election, and it was just, we were all so sick of everything that had happened in the election cycle. And so it was really just like a breath of fresh air. I remember just being like, wow, there's hope for our society, that, maybe we could have some more civil discourse. So anything you want to add to that, Shannon?
No, I would just piggyback on that. And it was a breath. I did walk away I walked away. I remember walking to my car through the parking lot and just feeling hopeful and happy. And that was really cool after discussing so many opposing topics. So It's encouraging.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I think that's the main thing we would like to come away from today, is a feeling of hope and not a feeling of depression about how hard it is. And not every conversation goes so well, obviously, but that's what we're going to learn more about today. So I'm going to pass it to Stephen, Dr. Stephen Koski, if you can take it from here and give us an introduction on how we can hopefully have more hopeful conversations.
Sure. Thanks so much. First of all, thanks so much for this opportunity to take part in this program. What we've already heard, I think, is that difference doesn't necessarily have to be a weakness or an enemy. That difference can actually be a strength and can add to the richness of community. So that's why I think this is so important, because I think the goal isn't necessarily to disagree less. I mean, if I asked everybody the question, do you have one person that you avoid because you worry about getting into a conversation, it'll devolve into something less than helpful. I'm guessing everybody listening can think of at least one person that they're avoiding. And I think partly because we make the mistake of thinking the goal is to disagree less. I actually don't think the goal is to disagree less. I think the goal is to disagree better. That conflict isn't necessarily the enemy. Conflict and disagreement is inevitable. It's part of life. Combat, that's optional. So I think part of the challenge isn't necessarily to avoid conflict as to how can we prevent conflict from turning into combat. Because I think actually our common life together is poorer because we're avoiding conversations like Shannon and Harrison had. Because to engage in those conversations where there's difference, it invites an opportunity to think deeper about something. It invites an opportunity to reflect. It invites an opportunity to actually kind of hold in tension complex ideas. But if we avoid those, we just go to our echo chambers and have people reinforce what we think we already know. And then I think our common life suffers as a result of that. So one of the things I really appreciate about the mission of Bend Young Professionals is what I read is one of the goals is to elevate community. So the first thing I want to say is I think being civil, learning how to be civil, have civil discourse, is too low of a bar. I'm not sure I want to be in a community where we just learn how to tolerate each other. I think I actually want something better than that, something richer than that, something where we can actually be together in our differences as opposed to just tolerating our differences. I think it was Lincoln in his second inaugural address said malice toward none and charity for all. And I think that's part of the goal. So I think part of our goal, particularly at the end of this election cycle and all that's going on right now, is how do we rehumanize each other? How do we avoid all of the demonization and the demeaning of one another? Because I think the problem isn't necessarily incivility as it's contempt. That somehow we have moved from contempt of someone's ideas to contempt of the person itself. And I think part of our goal is to get beyond that in some ways. Because I think also the goal isn't necessarily to avoid disagreement as it is to understand our disagreements better. I think the conflict continues, one, because we haven't had healthy, effective conversations. So we think we understand the other person's point of view, but we really don't. So if we can actually understand the disagreement better, I think we will understand the person better. And part of that, I think, is about valuing community more than we value being right. I mean, I spend a lot of time with people at the end of their life, and I rarely have heard somebody say, "Oh, thank God, I knew I was right." I think what people value and think about is relationships. And to say to value community over being right doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you're wrong, doesn't mean you give up your convictions. It means you are willing, just as Shannon and Harrison just displayed for us, you're willing to have a relational container that is willing to hold tension, that can have dialogue. And I think as a community, we're better as a result of that. So I want to give 3 quick keys. This is something I spend 2-day workshops doing. So this is a quick overview. And the first key, I think, in order to have these conversations is emotional wisdom. Listening. I don't think you can have a constructive, difficult conversation without listening. If you think of a scale from 0 to 10, and 0 you're calm, and 10 is you're about ready to lose it, I honestly think you cannot. It is physiologically impossible to listen when you're above 4. If you're angry, if you're upset, if you're frustrated, you're not listening. So I think part of it is taking responsibility for your own energy. There's a slide I just want us to look at for a second. It's at Indiana University Health, where they actually have a sign as you walk in the door that says, please take responsibility for the energy you bring into this space. Can you imagine if every organization, every business, every school, every church, every home even, where it says your words matter, your behaviors matter, our patients, our teams matter. So I love this. Take a slow, deep breath and make sure your energy is in check before entering. Because difficult conversations, it's really okay to be angry. Sometimes difficult conversations bring forth our anger. It's never okay to be cruel. It's never okay to demonize, to demean. So I think part of the first part is emotional wisdom that takes responsibility for your energy. I mean, I do a lot of marriage counseling, and often the person comes in and says how much they want to change the other person. And maybe for good reason. But I often say your best hope of that is not changing them and focusing on their energy. Your best hope of that is taking responsibility for your own energy. It's your energy that will influence their energy. And the second, Harrison already said it, I think the second key is curiosity. How do we move from judging each other to being curious? I think curiosity is really the secret to eliminating contempt. So rather than judging a person's viewpoint, gosh, I wonder why they think the way they think that way. I wonder why they feel the way they feel that way. I wonder why my ideas are so threatening to them. And part of that relates to the third key. So first, you have to take responsibility for your own energy. Second is be curious. And third is proximity. It's really hard to hate someone up close. And what Shannon and Harrison already exemplified for us is the willingness to get close, the willingness to have the courage to disagree with each other, to talk about things that might be hard. Civil rights leader Ruby Sales says, transformation never happens in the headspace where we begin with, what do you think about this? It only happens in the heart space where you're willing to get close enough to somebody and say, where does it hurt? So if I'm in a situation with somebody, and I was in one not long ago, where this person had really quite different views than I do on racism. And rather than try to change their mind, because that would never work, I just simply said, tell me some of the stories of your life that has led you to think the way you do. I'm curious again about what has shaped your viewpoint. You know, what sort of pain in your life has led you to fear the things that you fear? I didn't kind of word it that way. But I dared to get close to their story. Now, what that hopefully did was at least created the relational container that we can have more conversations as we go along. So a lot more with this, but I think what would be really helpful right now is to actually witness a difficult conversation. So we've already heard from Shannon and Harrison, and I understand that they have very strong and differing views on free speech and particularly hate speech. I've already said that I think our common life is poorer because we avoid these conversations. And the goal isn't to disagree less, but actually disagree better. So I invite them to disagree in front of all of us. And so just pretend we're not here and dive in and have this difficult conversation.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, Shannon, do you want to kick us off for the kind of how we arrived at this topic?
Sure. So Harrison and I, we were just chatting again about picking out a topic, and he brought up the First Amendment and free speech and kind of asked, I put it back on him. I asked him what his thoughts were on that. And he says, I believe in 100% free speech, and that includes hate speech. And so with that, my eyes opened pretty wide, and I realized that this was a topic we could definitely kind of go down and debate on a bit. So, and like you said, not a debate, but definitely have a civil discussion here about our feelings and thoughts on that. So that's kind of how we came to this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, I guess we could, so Shannon, kind of what was your reaction when I said a statement like that?
Well, I was shocked, honestly, first. It was my first reaction. And I was like, well, this is something that I feel strongly about. And so I wanted to talk more about it with you because I was really surprised. I view you as a kind human, a good parent. And so that statement to me just really surprised me a lot.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, and I guess I could start off with kind of putting it in the context of kind of what I'm thinking, because my view on that is there's a lot of like, I don't know, I've heard people say like, that's not free speech, that's hate speech. And there's certain things that I wouldn't put into that category. Like, you know, if you're incitement to riot, you know, like yelling fire in a movie theater, which they're closed now, so that's a bad example. But that would be like, people could get really hurt by, you know, being trampled to death in that situation. And there's other categories that, you know, like child pornography isn't protected under free speech, and I think that's good. And neither is obscenity. And then also defamation and going out and like trying to bring, you know, someone's name down just for the heck of it. But the reason I would push back on the hate speech as it should be protected, because I think it's so challenging to actually, it's not an endorsement on hate speech, but I think it should be protected, because in order to not protect it, it gets really tricky. Like, you have to find someone to define hate speech. And so that would create, like, you have to have a hate speech committee that sets down the laws for that. And then you also have to have enforcement of that for, you know, who's going to actually make sure that happens. And the concern on that, the biggest concern I see is like, who gets to decide what makes hate speech? And if it's, you know, our current president, like, how many people want Donald Trump deciding what hate speech is? Like, I think that it's few and far between. So anyway, that's kind of the challenging position that we get into. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
So I do think there's a way. I don't know if it's a committee. There are other models of it. Canada actually has a law against hate speech. So I do think there are models that we can reflect on and look at and kind of see how they're doing things, because I do think it's more of an issue. And I don't see it being a threat to the First Amendment like you were talking about as well. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that too, about your thoughts on threatening our First Amendment and how that would look with the hate speech in our future.
Yeah, well, I think that's, you know, looking at why the First Amendment was written, it has the Bill of Rights, it starts with limiting government. And that's why the First Amendment is there, because it's like, the Congress shall enact no laws limiting the establishment or practice of religion, and then, or limiting freedom of the press or freedom of speech. And so I think that's the context that is in my mind, is like, we need to limit, we should not try to limit free speech anymore because of the potential for that to be abused by people in power. That's kind of like the main concern. And I think that's where the founders of the Bill of Rights were coming from, was that they had seen freedom of speech being abused and how a government used that to control people. And so I think that, would be something to avoid.
Okay. My question about that is that this was written a long, long time ago. And we are in a day and age now that we have megaphones and we can put everything out there. And that was not in consideration, as well as it's protecting not only good guys, but we're protecting bad guys in this amendment as well.
So what would you, if you're, what would be your alternative for, like, how would you limit free speech, or what is the model in Canada? Or
so it is an offense if you're caught doing it. I didn't get into diving into it too deep about actually how they enforce it, and it is hard to enforce, but it does exist, and that got me to thinking more about, we have parental advice on movies. We already have different things like that in place that you don't argue with, most likely as a parent. Maybe you do, I don't know. But some of those things are set for us and some guidelines and structure. And from the day we go to school, we have all the structure and different things. And it would just be more of a, like I said, I don't know what the law would actually look like, but a guideline that we follow and enforce. And there's a lot of parents that are not teaching their kids values. And so all the bullying that's going on, especially with all the online schooling right now that's happening. My friend's 13-year-old daughter had another student log in as another student in his class that was of color, and this individual was not, and fully attack that kid in front of the entire class. Like, that should be enforced somehow. That is not okay. Who knows if that parent is watching that child and what they're doing, but I do think there needs to be some sort of second level for that.
Yeah, and I think that schools do have a unique position, and they already have limitations on free speech. That's like, it's a special environment that's designed for learning. And so if something gets in the way of that learning environment, then I think it's important to, and also like harassment. I don't think I wouldn't be okay with that, in a school setting at all. But I think the problem I see with it is if we define hate speech as, something that makes someone uncomfortable or offends them, like, how far down the rabbit hole do we go? And how much of just someone's I don't know, how much do we need to protect people from being offended? If the intent or the goal is not to harm them, but just to talk about an idea that you have, I guess, how would you, respond to that? Like, is it just any language that would offend someone, or how would, I don't know, what would help me understand that?
Sure. I think it's when anyone is attacking, not even just an individual, but a race, a gender, it doesn't matter what it is. And so I know a lot of people, the whole sticks and stones will break my bones and words will never hurt me. That doesn't exist, right? That's not how we truly are. And I think as humans, we know when we're saying words that are setting out to actually hurt an individual, rather than you're like, oops, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Like, we know when we slip up or when we're intentionally saying something harmful to a group. And so I think that's the difference. And I don't know, I definitely don't have a solution on how to enforce that. But I think there is a big difference between attacking and accidentally saying something to someone to hurt someone. And our sensitivities are all different. I heard a talk once on hurt. Let's take hurt for an example. Our levels of hurt are all different. So and we need to respect that. It's not like we have to walk on eggshells all the time, I don't think. But I do think we need to realize that we have different effects. Like, if someone is of color or gender stuff going on, like, I feel like if they've been attacked in their past, then they have previous PTSD on this stuff. And if it keeps happening and happening, we're going to lead to more suicides. I had something said to me when I was 10 years old as a little girl that I will never forget. And it was really awful. And I have body image use over it still to this day as an adult. So I don't know. Like I said, it's very different than an actual slip up and intentionally setting out to hurt someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, that is people being mean, is like, that's definitely out there. And I don't think that you can deny that there are racists and there are, bigots and sexists and all these people. But I think there's also, we live in a culture that is quick to label someone as a bigot or a racist when that's like, no, that's not even the case. Like, take, for example, over the summer, it was like, if you're not posting something in support of Black Lives Matter, you're a racist. It's like I saw people saying that. And it's like, well, I don't usually post about anything political. And so does that make me a racist because I'm just actually acting consistently? And so that's where it's like anyway, I see that we're really quick to put these labels on actions that may not be, appropriate. And then we have this, like, people just lash out about that of like, you can't speak that opinion because it's racist. Or if you have a different opinion on something, we can't allow that because it's bigoted or sexist or something like that. And that's where I see this conversation going, that if people continue to just be like, yeah, let's limit all hate speech, and it's defined as anything that makes me uncomfortable, I see that's really dangerous and actually produces the opposite of, like diversity and community. It actually harms community. So I don't know.
I have a question for you, Harrison.
Okay.
So people know they're protected on social media right now, right? Especially from their employers. So people that just spout out vile trash all the time on their social media, and they're completely protected, and their employers can't say anything. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, first of all, I totally disagree with their approach. I can at one time, think of someone like, I totally disagree with your perspective, and I think you're wrong and spreading hate and hurt. But the other thing is, I would still protect their right to express those things. But I would also, and I think it also depends on the method that you're doing it. Like, if you're writing a blog and you're, doing all these horrible things, like, let's just not read the blog. Like, how about that as our, response to someone like that, or defriend them? Like, why? I don't know. I guess, why do we have to have the government enforce that? Why don't we just, say, well, I'm not going to be your friend anymore because you're vile and sick. So I don't know.
Yeah, I struggle with this because I'm white and privileged, and I know free speech protects me because I am advantaged and popular, honestly, compared to minorities. And I just think about also that allowing this free speech and hate speech to go on is we're asking the disadvantaged and those that are being attacked to shoulder the burden. And so that's what I would really like to see change. It's just not fair from, honestly, you and my perspective, because we are privileged. And so I think it's hard to fully see that, but I would like to see that shift.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point that I've thought a lot about. And I think that if we take away free speech and we, put in a clause that protects hate speech, however we want to define that, if we rewind that clock of history 150 years, I think that, and we implement that same law that we would want to do now, I think it actually stops movements like, Black suffrage, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement. Like, all of those things were offensive to the mainstream society. And the only reason they were protected was because there was free speech and these people could say things. Like 150 years ago during the Civil War, like people were offended if you would say that blacks were equal with whites, which is just totally crazy. But it was a law like this that protected uncomfortable speech, that allowed those things to exist and to actually create these really good reforms in society that we need. And so my concern is that we're actually cutting off the legs of progress in the name of progress. Like we're actually, anyway, that's kind of the irony of what I see a law like this doing, or views like this doing.
Yeah, I actually feel the opposite of that. I feel like we are enabling hate and allowing it to happen. Yes, there were a lot of things that could not have been said or accomplished in the past, but that was, like you said, 150 years ago. This is a completely new time, and those laws and different things were written back then, and we need to keep that in mind. And so the free speech with some MLK and Rosie Parks and stuff like that was super important to enable them to be able to step up and say what they need. But again, the social media aspect of it is a completely different ballgame that we obviously were not prepared for then, and it needs to be reevaluated in some way.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, this is good. I don't know how much time we have for this, but we could keep going, and we'll probably have to grab a beer afterwards.
Yeah, all day.
Yeah.
Which is where I'll jump in as long as I'm invited to have the beer with you. But
yeah,
because that's what I love. Because what you just said there is there's a relational container here that there's still disagreement, but we're willing to hold the tension of that in this relational container to continue the dialogue. Some of the things that I observed, and then I have a question for you, is, the beauty of this is you're both very calm, kind of, you're able to have this kind of conversation because you are able to listen to one another in a fairly calm state of mind and body. Which was clear to me, what was absolutely clear to me, that your goal entering this conversation was not to win. It really was to have a conversation with one another. You actually didn't start the conversation from where you thought you were right. It actually was fascinating to me. It took a while for you to get to that place where you started to kind of be a little bit more emotionally invested with what you thought was right. What to me was great, though, is you didn't start there. So the door was actually open already to have that relational container. And I heard a lot of, what do you think? Tell me more, which is kind of getting from the just sharing opinions to that proximity. Well, tell me more. Share a little bit about your ideas on that. The question I have for you is, well, two questions. One is, did you feel heard in that whole process? So do you feel like you were heard and your viewpoint or you yourself were valued? And secondly, are you clear? If you had to state it in a sentence, are you clear about what your disagreement is?
Shannon, you want to take that first, or?
Yeah, so I did feel heard. So thank you very much, Harrison. I felt like that was a very productive conversation. And then what was the second? I'm sorry, about the second question.
Do you think you have a clear sense of what you're actually, if I asked you in one sentence, what are you disagreeing about? Would you be able to answer that?
Oh, I believe so. I think it's a law on hate speech, and if we need to look at reforming our First Amendment.
Nice. Yeah. So I also feel heard, and I would also just say that I really appreciate Shannon and the conversations that we've had, because they've challenged me. And I also, one of the things that really was helpful in this conversation is Shannon is someone that probably already guessed all of my viewpoints and yet was still willing to have this conversation and not jump to conclusions. And so it was really a good space that we could talk. And so that was great. But then, yeah, I think we actually disagree on the effects of what a law would do. And so I think that's actually more of where the conversation is going. And it's fun to see that, like, you know, Shannon thinks that it's actually going to be helpful. And I would see that in, you know, many ways it's going to have the opposite effect of what we're actually looking at. And that's what I think what we're arguing about is what the actual effect of this would be. And both of us are looking at it from, like, how can we make society better? Like, I'm not, you know, how do we preserve the best in this society? And so I think that's kind of what we're disagreeing on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely take the role as looking at now, protecting now and those around us. And I know Harrison thinks a little broader of the future. So it's definitely a disagreement.
I think what I also witnessed, which was really beautiful, is both of you willing to actually learn. Kind of, you didn't come in convinced, entrenched. There was an openness to actually learn from one another. A real kind of intent to listen and to learn, which I think is really important. I had in a marriage counseling situation, someone come in and said, I just don't understand my significant other. I don't get it. It's like this person is living on another planet, which is kind of what we're experiencing right now in the divisions. And I said, well, quit trying. And he was all kind of confused. And I said, well, your goal should be less you understanding her. But what if you shifted your focus to make it your mission in life to make sure that she feels understood? You can still disagree, but something will shift if she feels understood. Because if I'm listening to you thinking my goal is to understand, what I'm thinking is, do I agree with you? Is this right? Does this make sense to me? So I'm totally focused on me. It's very different to, tell me more, but which is what I witnessed in your conversation. Tell me more about that. I want to know more about, this is what I hear you saying. Is that right? Because then you can then go to say, okay, this is what I hear you saying. I view it a little bit differently. I'd like to share what I say, which is what I witnessed in your conversation, which is, which I think leads to a richness in relationship. So thank you for calling forth your braver angels. I think Lincoln called forth our our better angels, which I think is really important. I actually think we also need to call forth our braver angels, which is having the courage to have the kind of conversations you just had, because I think that does elevate our community.
I agree, absolutely. I want to say thank you so much to both of you for having that discussion. I haven't been able to just witness a logical discussion without it being involved with family members and me feeling all of a sudden really heightened or emotional. I would love to jump into some Q&A of you, Stephen. And one of the things I want to ask is, you mentioned that these two were really calm. And they did a great job. They have that trust built already, which we know. What happens when you're having a conversation with someone that either you don't have trust built with already, or they are not being open to you? They're not open to learning. Is it still worthwhile to be open and try to learn from them?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say it's not worthwhile. Oh, I certainly would want to first ask the question, are you safe? Because sometimes it's just not safe to be in that situation, and it's not safe to have that conversation. So perhaps it's in that situation, it's not helpful. But again, it goes back to the energy. If somebody is kind of really heightened in their anxiety and heightened in their anger, it is amazing the impact that you can have if you can stay calm. Those of you who are parents, if you imagine a toddler having a tantrum, which is what we see on the adult scale every single day, is adults having tantrums. it's really powerful when the parent can stay calm. But when the parent matches that tantrum with their own tantrum, then we're in trouble. But if I can stay calm, I think my energy actually could potentially influence the other person's energy. So I wouldn't say it's not worth it. I'd want to make sure you're safe. I would say, can you stay calm in that? I think that's where, if you can ask the question again, rather than you coming at the person, ask the question, you seem really, really, you seem to have really strong emotions about this. Can you tell me a little bit what sits behind that? I would like to understand more. Even asking that question in a calm way, you then shifted them yelling their talk points to you. And you then asked them to say, tell me a little bit about your story. And then maybe there's potential, I think, for it to shift.
That's great. We saw even with Shannon and Harrison that, we are in a little bit of a different scenario here because they knew there was an end time to their conversation. But even knowing there was an end time, there was there's an awkward, I could keep going. How do you gracefully, it seems like there's just always a counterpoint, that could be made. How do you gracefully end these discussions or move on from them?
Well, I think if I go back to that imagery of, if we can see it as a relational container, again, if we can see the value is actually the relationship and not being right. If the value is in being right, then we want to somehow come to a neat, tidy conclusion where we're right. And somehow I've convinced you that you're wrong, and then it becomes attack defend. If the value is actually the relational container, then I can say to you, gosh, this is such an important conversation. I need to go now. I just have to be somewhere else. But I really want to continue this conversation. So how can we find time to go have a beer or whatever it happens to be to continue the conversation? So again, I think it's, rather than seeing these as isolated conversations, that's never going to work. But instead seeing the relational container, and how can we live in the tension of that and continue the dialogue?
Living in the tension, it's really uncomfortable.
But so important.
We have another question about, when is it our role to speak up when someone else does or says something that seems wrong to us? So there's a fear there that not only will anything they say be dismissed, but also that maybe they'll become an antagonist. So it just sounds like that lack of trust issue again. When do we feel like it is our role to speak up, and how do we do that?
Yeah, that's that's hard, because sometimes agreeing to disagree is not necessarily the best solution. I think it was James Baldwin who said, I'll agree to disagree with you as long as our disagreement does not lead to my oppression. So I think there is value in being able to say, I feel strongly about this. Because I think there's a huge difference between being outraged and hate. And what I'm witnessing in our culture, in our society right now, there's a whole lot to be outraged about right now. And I'd be worried about you as a human being if there are certain things that don't outrage you. But what I'm also witnessing, though, is sometimes our outrage turns into hate, and we then become the very thing we're protesting. So I think that's the thing, that's what we need to prevent, is how can we protest? How can we state our strong viewpoints in a way that in some way isn't just simply a mirror of what we're reacting against? So that's where I can say, Addie, I feel really strongly about this, and I feel it's really important for me to be able to share with you how I feel about this. But I also I also want to hear your viewpoints. So again, tell me more about why you, because I disagree. I just see this situation just so starkly differently than you do. So I'm back to the curiosity. So I'm curious about that. So again, share a little bit more about your life experience that has led you to see the situation in this way. You know, and hopefully there might be space that I can share some of my experience that has led me to feel this way. But there's something really, really powerful if you choose to listen first. Because back to what I asked them, why I asked them, did you feel heard? When someone feels heard and they feel understood, you can hear someone and understand them without agreeing with them. They're not the same things. But if you feel heard and you feel like I understand you, you're going to be 100 times more likely to want to listen to me. But if you don't feel heard, you don't feel like I value what you have to say, well, we're not going to get anywhere.
And you mentioned this in the beginning, but closeness is the best way to have these conversations, not through email, not not on Facebook. Invite them to coffee.
Yep.
Invite them to get maybe alcohol.
I'm one of those people who thinks email particularly should be about sharing information and not emotions. Because communication is 97% not the words that are spoken or the words that are written. It's everything around the words. So, gosh, particularly emails with emotional content, I guarantee you 80% of the time are misunderstood and then lead to misunderstandings. So, you know, even if you get one of those emails, I would send an email back saying, I want to talk more about this. Can we meet? And then choose to listen more. And based on my vocation, I shouldn't say include alcohol, but sometimes that's helpful too.
I was going to say, I'm not sure if that's something you can recommend as a pastor, but yeah. Context
is super important.
Are you going to be in trouble on Sunday? No.
If there's a context where people can feel relaxed, feel comfortable, feel not threatened, you know, it's sort of like we give our kids time out, back to on a scale from 0 to 10. You know, so sometimes just the space to be calm so that I can listen is just so vital.
So great. The last question I have is actually for Shannon and Harrison. We're getting lots of comments and, you know, just thanking you guys for the discussion and that you did a great job and really great points on both sides. They're wondering did either of you feel yourself getting slightly upset, and then, you know, kind of what was going through your mind hearing the other person's opinions?
You want to go, Harrison? Or
sure. Yeah, so I think it's a good, now that I hear the answer of how to end these conversations, that would be helpful. I've been a part of conversations that start out really good, and then the longer they go, the more intense they become and don't always end well. So yeah, I mean, Shannon brought up a lot of points I hadn't considered before. And so I don't really, you know, it's always good. I really appreciate talking with people from different perspectives because I usually have not considered what they think is like their first thought is like, oh, what about the fact that, you know, we have social media then and 150 years ago we didn't. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So some of that is like surprising, you know, to hear that. And then some of it's like, you know, I get a little bit like, it all made sense to me until I heard your counterpoint. And so it's kind of like, anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it does. It all made sense in my mind, you know, until I hear someone else speak their mind. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I don't feel that I got emotional. I feel like when I do talk more about something I am passionate about, I do get a little bit more, I don't even want to say heated because I didn't feel that at all. And it really, I mean, with Harrison and I, as you have all seen, that we can have these civil conversations, and it's very different when you're talking to a family member. Like Addie said, it's how do we keep those emotions in check? And yeah, that's interesting. But during this conversation, I definitely did not feel really emotional because I felt very comfortable with the topic and with Harrison and what we were doing. So
yeah, I would add though, I did feel before the conversation started, like I could feel my heart rate going up with just like anxiety, kind of knowing you're getting into it. And like Stephen was talking about, like just understanding that, you know, you're bringing energy into the conversation and trying to put a check on that. So.
Any last words for us, Stephen, on how to slow the heart rate, like deep breaths? Because normally when you're in it, it's like it's too late, you're in it.
I think it's so helpful. The image that's really helpful to think about is between everything that happens, between everything everyone says or does, and how you respond, there's a space. And really our power, the quality of our relationships and conversations exist in that space. But right now, for most people, that space is like this. So we react from frustration rather than somehow finding ways to widen that space so that we're responding to each other from wisdom, from a desire to understand, as opposed to reacting to each other from anger and frustration. So sometimes whatever it is for you that will help you widen that space. I know I've been in situations where I've been in a intense emotional conversation where I've actually said to the person, hold on, I feel myself getting kind of worked up here and I'm not listening. And what you're saying is super, super important. And I want to hear you. Give me 5 minutes. I'm just going to go for a walk. I'm going to take some deep breaths and I'm going to come back and I want to hear what you have to say. Obviously, it doesn't work if I go for a walk and spend 5 minutes thinking what an idiot you are. You know? I need to take 5 minutes, deep breath, take responsibility. I want to spend those 5 minutes thinking, how can I be a better partner in this conversation? And then to come back. Not most people, not everybody, but I think most people would respect that because you have expressed that what they're saying is important. I mean, that's different than just walking away. You know, you've said what you're saying is important. Give me 5 minutes. I want to listen.
So valuable. Oh, go ahead, Shannon.
I was just gonna say, I think you just solved all our problems, Stephen.
I know, you solved all our problems. We'll be back in 5 minutes and then you don't come back. No, that's so good. Finding ways to create the space that you need in those conversations and making the other person feel heard and understood, I think are
I would also add, if I can real quick, and just encourage people to have the conversation. Like sometimes it's just like, you know, go get some practice, find someone you know you disagree with and just listen to them. And that's always encouraging to me. And it helps you have those conversations more, but just have the conversation and try to look at it like practice. Like, don't look at it as the thing, but like, how could I practice this skill? So
I like that. I look forward to disagreeing with you more, Harrison, in the future.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here. Stephen, your wisdom, as always, is just so valuable. And Shannon and Harrison, just what a great conversation. I really appreciated it. And I know our audience today did as well. Thank you so much. You represented City Club and Bend YP really, really well. And I appreciate it so much. And you guys took a lot of time out of your day as well or your weeks, actually. We've been planning for this for quite a while. So thank you all for your time. I have a couple closing things really quickly. I know it's 1 o'clock. If you enjoyed today's forum and would like to help support City Club, please consider being a member or a live stream sponsor. So you can head over to cityclubco.org. And then I want to just say that Ben YP loves our connection with City Club. We love doing this with them every December. We're also launching a YP passport where YPs and employers can get a pass to all of the YP stuff for the year. And that includes a free City Club membership as well. So that's coming in January. So make sure to sign up at bendyp.org for our email list to make sure you get the launch on that. So join City Club on January 21st is the next month, and learn how local nonprofits are a significant economic driver in our community. So they're gonna talk about paradigms like, doesn't it seem like Central Oregon have more than its fair share of nonprofits? And does it seem like they're always asking for donations? So nonprofits are growing a ton, and it's gonna be a really great conversation to just talk about those paradigms. And so yes, it's gonna be really good. That's January 21st, the next City Club event. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome.